Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the open centers and gates in our human design chart, in our body graph. Now, as we hear very often, or maybe not if you're newer to human design, anywhere that we have open centers in our body graph or open gates, we are here to get wise about that energy. In this lifetime, we are going to school to learn about that energy. And I think it's easier to focus on the centers because there are 64 gates and there are 9 centers. So if we think about all of the gates that we don't have defined, for a lot of us, that may be a lot of gates. Now, when I look at a chart, there are specific dormant or hanging gates that I look at on their opposite end to see if that specific undefined gate is important or not. So I don't look at every single undefined gate in your chart, but I look at the ones that seem very important to me because I understand what is kind of going on in your chart. When it comes to the centers, it's a little bit easier because I can look at a chart and you can look at your chart and you can see what areas, what centers do I have undefined or open. Now, before we begin, I do want to explain to you the difference between something being undefined and something being open. I see this interchanged quite a bit, especially on Instagram or other short form content. And it's not the end of the world to do so, but there are differences. So I want to explain that to you in case you are not aware of them. I've actually heard of a lot of people saying that they're confused about this. In your body graph, when you have the 9 centers and you have these gates hanging off of them, right? If you have a center that has no dormant or hanging gates on it, there's no gates defined off of it, it's completely open and it's not colored in, that is an open center. If it is open, it's not colored in, but you've got dormant gates, the hanging gates, even one of them, then that makes the center undefined. And if you have it colored in, meaning you have a channel connected to that center, it is a defined gate, it is a defined center. The reason why it's not completely true that they're the same thing, like I said, I think when we're talking in passing, it's fine to talk about them being open and undefined being the same thing, in my opinion. I don't think it's a huge deal. But obviously, if you're wanting to look deeper within human design or if I'm doing a reading, then I do notice this difference. And the difference is anywhere that we have definition in our chart, we have some inherent strength there because from the moment we were born, we have had consistent access to that energy. So if I have dormant gates from an undefined center, even though I don't have definition in that center and I don't have access to that center specifically, when by transit or consistently, when by transit or by somebody being in my aura, that center becomes defined, I already have some frameworks that I work off of because I have those dormant gates. You may hear me talk about dormant and hanging gates, and I guess you can really interchange those. I also don't think that's a huge deal. Technically, if you have gates defined from an undefined center, they're dormant. If you have gates hanging from a defined center, they're hanging gates. But like I said, I'm probably going to interchange those and I just don't think it's a big deal. It's just vocabulary. It's important to know, but like I said, not the end of the world. So if somebody comes, I'll use myself for example. I have a lot of dormant gates of my undefined root. So when my root gets defined by somebody being in my presence, how I naturally feel my root in those moments when I have that access to it is through those gates those dormant gates that I have. Whereas somebody who has a completely open root with no gates at all defined, they don't have any framework for understanding how to use that root energy. And so the idea of pressure, the adrenaline pressure that the root gives us, is very abstract to these people because they have no consistency within that center to work with. It's only through conditioning by people or transits in which they get any sort of idea about what is this root center about? What is this pressure? What is this stress? What is this adrenaline? What is this desire to hurry? I don't understand. I can't figure this out. And so it can be more unsettling for them. And it can mean that they're very, very sensitive with that center. So, in this example, as a root center, you would be very, very sensitive to stress, to rushing, to that sense of somebody feeling pressure. Whereas someone like me who has an undefined but has these gates, I may definitely still feel that pressure, but I usually will feel it in very distinct ways. So I have more of a framework around what it means to feel pressured. I may still have some not self themes about how to use that pressure, and it may be difficult for me too, but there's a difference. So I wanted to make that very clear before we talk about, and I guess I already kind of talked about it, but I want to make that clear that there is a difference between the undefined and open centers, not life-changing, but still a distinction. So how do we learn from our open centers? Well, each center has a not self theme. People who have defined centers can also experience the not self themes of those centers. However, it tends to not cause as much of an issue or disruption in their life if they do experience those not self themes. When we have a center that is undefined or open, we tend to fall into the not self themes of those centers more easily. And so, Ra actually said that where we are open, we are receiving, a lot of us are living from our openness, because we don't know how to utilize that energy, and it feels like there's something missing in us. That openness feels like nothing's quite there. And so, like I said, it's very interesting when I look at people's charts and I know which specific open gates to look at. And obviously I look at always all the open centers, but the specific open gates to look at. And this transformed my way of looking at my chart a lot, because at first with human design, I was so focused on looking at my definition, which is also important, right? We don't want to neglect the definition. Like I said, those are areas in which you are naturally quite strong in. However, we also don't want to neglect how powerful our open centers can be and how often they can direct our lives without us even recognizing it. And the thing with those open centers and open gates is that when we are living through them, we are living through a place in which we are learning about in this lifetime. So, for example, if I am living through the not self theme of the root, and I'm letting that dictate my life and how I experience pressure rather than looking to my defined centers in order to decide how I want to use my strengths in this lifetime, then inherently I'm going to be very confused because I'm looking to a center that is here to learn rather than to have strength in my chart. But I want you to start thinking, and I'm going to go through each of the centers and their not self themes specifically, and so we can start talking about them individually. However, for this video, I want you to start looking at your open centers and understanding that these are places in which you are here to get wise in this lifetime. And what's very interesting, and this is very specific, but I think in general, we attract people who are defined where we are undefined or open, and vice versa. So in a way, that's how we can learn about those centers. My partner and I have an 8-1 relationship. So there are certain compatibilities that we look at in human design, and 8-1, have some fun. But pretty much, I'm a pretty open person. I have my ajna, throat, emotion, solar plexus, and my will defined, and everything else is open. So I have 5 open centers. Not the most open person, but I have quite a bit of openness. He doesn't have quite as much, but the only center that we both don't have defined is our heads, and so that's why it creates an 8-1 relationship. Let me know if you guys want more information about the different types of relationships, because that's also very interesting. I think that when you read online about the different types of relationships, there's very little nuance, and I would love to bring more nuance to that. I feel like I'm the queen of nuance. I love bringing nuance to situations. But he is open, or he is defined in almost every center that I am not. So yes, we have some overlapping ones, like we both have our throat. I believe that's the only one that we have that's overlapping is our throat. Yes. But it's interesting that I invited him into my life and he invited me into his life, because through his definition of these centers that I don't have defined, I am learning how to be wise about this energy. A common one that I see quite often actually is undefined solar plexus with a defined solar plexus. And that's our relationship. And it's not the easiest pairing, but because our solar plexus is our newest awareness center, a lot of people who are open there have a really hard time being around people who are defined there, because our level of evolution has not quite reached the peak amount of awareness in that center, their solar plexus. So we don't quite understand it on a societal humanity, like really on a humanity level, we don't really understand it. Specifically people who don't have their solar plexus defined. And so somebody who's undefined in the solar plexus and is inviting somebody in who has a defined solar plexus, who moves through these waves consistently and generally has big emotions. And now this undefined solar plexus being is having to feel and amplify and figure out what to do with this emotional energy. They have now become more wise about emotional energy. Whereas had they not gone through that, their emotional center would have stayed quite undeveloped because there's no inherent strength there. So when we have defined centers, we have to recognize that these are our strength areas. And so we're here to teach people about that center. And the people who have it defined, undefined, or open are here to learn and to become wise about these things. So when we get deeper individually into the centers and they're not self-themes, I think this will make a lot more sense for people to understand how they can stop living from their openness and start, because to understand that the openness is where we are here to learn. It's not where we're here to live from. We're here to live from our definition. And I think this is a very unconscious process for a lot of people. I know it was for me. Even when I started learning human design, it wasn't until I started going deeper and deeper into it and I started seeing what Ra was talking about and hearing him talk about how a lot of people live from the openness and how we don't have strength there. So why are we living from there? We are here to learn in those areas, but we're here to teach others with our strengths. And so we need to recognize what each aspect is here for. Neither is good or bad. A lot of people don't like having open and undefined centers because they think it makes them weak when I use the word strength in terms of your defined center. And in a way, I guess, sure, you can look at it that way. But for me, when I see somebody who has a lot of open centers, it tells me that person, number one, has probably had to deal with a lot of ups and downs in their lives. And yet these people are the ones that are very wise, because they came into this world having to learn about a lot of things. I personally know some people who are very defined people, and it's not that they're not wise. It's just that they're here to very much be a specific type of way, and there's not a lot of room for flexibility because they have so much inherent strength and so much inherent structure in their body graph. Whereas people who are more open are here to utilize the strengths they have, and yet a lot of their being is about learning in this lifetime, and it's about being wise in this lifetime. So it's not good or bad to have one or the other, it's just different. And so I would love to instill an understanding of that into people before we get deeper into the centers, and recognize that your openness is beautiful and so is your definition. And the dance between your openness and your definition is what makes you you, uniquely you. And that's the whole process of individuation that human design is really here to give to other people, or not to other people, to people in general, is to say, yes, like you are your own unique being, and that's by design. And so when I look at a body graph, my perspective is always, how do I show this person how they are unique and how they can best utilize that uniqueness to live an authentic life using their strategy and authority? I could talk about this forever, but I hope that I've given some level of understanding in some way about openness versus definition. And I hope that when I go into each of the not self themes individually, maybe this will make a lot more sense for some of you guys who are maybe still confused. Human design is such a vast system, and I like to move very slowly with it because I really don't, and Ra says this too, and from my experimentation, I really believe this. Other than projectors, which even as projectors like myself, we do still have to be mindful of this. But for the other 4 types, especially, when we are learning about human design, it's really important not to try to get all of the information at once and really focus on the idea of this being an experiment and using our strategy and authority as much as possible before we start getting into the details and all of the information, because there's so much information out there. So I tread lightly with human design because I don't want people to get too much into their heads. I've noticed that so often with human design. And specifically, because obviously I study astrology as well. I love astrology. I love tarot. I have so many skills. My conscious sun is in gate 16. I have so many skills. That's actually a great example I want to just briefly mention. Is this was a huge aha moment for me. Is my conscious sun is in gate 16, and the other gate that I have there that I don't have defined that connects to gate 16 is 48. And I was living in so much fear of expressing my gate 16 because there was a part of me that was so focused on having gate 48 and feeling like I'm incomplete and I need that gate in order to express my skills into the world. And it was once I learned about this and I recognized that I'm not here to have gate 48. That's for somebody else. That's not for me. And I was living in this condition, and that's a very important channel for me. So I was living in this conditioned state of I can't express my skills because I don't know enough about them. I don't have the depth of gate 48. And recognizing, well, I'm not meant to. Woo, amazing. Anyway, so it's a vast system, and I don't want to give so much information that people get very much in their heads, because all of these other things, astrology, tarot, yes, all of it is best utilized as an experiment. But I think specifically for human design, that is very, very clear from the very beginning of the transmission of human design that this is meant to be an experiment and not to be from the mind. And Ra always said that only people who can learn more at first are projectors, because they are here to learn and to master systems and to learn all these subjects. And if you have a gate 16 defined, then you are here to learn skills as well. So I think that's all I want to say about open centers and open gates, and I look forward to seeing you guys as we dive deeper into each of the centers. I'll see you next time.